Hello, I'm Bianca Cotton, host of Behind the Confident Smile, and I have the pleasure of having Farah Harris, the Farah, here with me today.
Girl, thank you.
We are going to be discussing her diagnoses of ADHD in adulthood and all of what that means. So, thank you for being here and opening up a chapter of your book for us today.
Thank you for having me. You know I'm going to say yes to you.
My pleasure. So, you are a wife, a mom, a entrepreneur, a author of The Color of Emotional Intelligence, and just fabulous, right?
Thank you. Okay.
And underneath all of that, the ADHD diagnosis, before we get into how you learned about it, what is ADHD?
So it's interesting because when you research it, they're going to give like the clinical diagnoses. And so for your viewers, let me also state that I'm a psychotherapist on top
Correct.
of all of that. But my clients aren't typically clients that have ADHD. So this is not something that I evaluate or I assess. If I feel like there's some symptoms, I may recommend for them to go get evaluated. But from looking at what our APA, which is our American Psychological Association, what we're looking at, what other clinicians have said, how the DSM, which is our like clinical Bible, how it breaks down ADHD is that it's, inattentiveness, it's hyperactivity and inability to handle impulsivity. It's under the umbrella of neurodivergence. It's the most common type of neurodivergence. Another type of neurodivergence is autism. And the thing that I'm frustrated with is that oftentimes it is defined in a very negative way, as if, it's like almost a death sentence for you to have ADHD, that it's going to impact your relationships and work in such an adverse way. So it's not encouraging, because when I was thinking about this conversation and I looked it up and I was like, oh yeah, I don't technically, diagnose this. Let me see what they're saying. And many of the links were not necessarily encouraging. And, this diagnosis is often given to children. It's something that we see early in childhood, but often it's reflective of little boys who can't sit still. And so there are girls that get undiagnosed because it shows up differently for them. And definitely also for those of us who are part of the global majority, we often get misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. And so we're finding more and more people getting late diagnoses, like myself, because it just did not show as hyperactivity physically or inattentiveness or impulsivity in the negative way that has been viewed as. It's like it's a little kid, a little boy's issue, and not something that so many of us actually experience.
Wow. So, when you talk about it shows up differently in girls, and also probably Black women, right? I've been reading some articles and like, interesting. I'll ask Farah this. So, how has it shown up for you, either prior to you being diagnosed and then after you were diagnosed? Like, there were some signs before.
Definitely.
But I didn't maybe have the language for it because it's particularly been geared towards little boys.
Okay, so I'm going to make it clear. I don't think I have the typical ADHD story, because from what I've done in my own little informal research, with friends, family, with clients, colleagues, the neurodivergence community or divergent community, it's a spectrum. So like with autism, it's a spectrum. With ADHD, it's a spectrum. With dyslexia, it's a spectrum. So some may have a little more challenges in one area versus, another type. So my ADHD may show up differently than, for example, my son, who is 12 years old, and we got him evaluated last year as well. And so I also see that I don't have the story of, I always felt something was different. Or, I struggled in school. That was my issue. I was a very good student. I graduated with honors. College is where I now, in hindsight, can recognize how ADHD played a part. I struggled in my college career, but then graduated again with honors with my master's. And so it was one of those things where I feel like I was always neurotypical. And so now it's like, oh no, you weren't. Here's the evidence of how your brain works differently. But it was so normalized. And again, since I didn't have an issue with school, there weren't any behavioral issues. It was just, oh, Farah's talkative. That's that impulsivity. It's just like my parents would always be like, popcorn, it's just always got something to say. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that could be attributed to ADHD. In college, when I said that there was this stark difference, for those of us who have ADHD, our brain is wired for novelty, for challenges, for things that are interesting to us. And it is almost, dare I say, painful to do things we don't want to do. Like we struggle with that executive functioning of like, just do it. It's just, it's time to clean up the room. Just pick up the glass and put it in the sink. No. It's like, I don't want to do that right now because our brain is on to the next thing. And so when I got to college and I realized, oh, the degree that I was looking to graduate with, I had no interest in it. So the classes were more challenging for me because I didn't have an interest in economics. I didn't have an interest in finance. Though I thought I was going to go ahead and be the real life Claire Huxtable and become a corporate attorney, I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work for me. And that was my first experience with depression. And so I don't know if you've seen, there's a clip with Trevor Noah. And he's doing an interview and he's explaining how ADHD can show up as depression. And again, in hindsight, recognizing those times where I felt like I couldn't be the smart girl. Like, this school's never been hard. I've never gotten lower than an A on a paper. What are you talking about? My writing is a C. What are you saying? A D. I've never seen this letter in my life. Like, what is going on? And recognizing I struggled so hard in college because I had undiagnosed ADHD and I was studying something I was not interested in. And therefore, even when I try to be with the smartest kids in the class, do the study groups, all of the things, I just couldn't get it. Like my brain just could not process it. And so when there was time away from school, I did graduate, y'all. Okay, I graduated by the skin of my teeth, but I graduated. But when I decided to get back to school and get my master's degree in mental health counseling, it was like my world opened up again. I got excited about education. I got excited about learning because I was in the space that interested me. Like even if it was difficult concepts, it wasn't so difficult that I didn't want to learn, that I didn't want to try. And like I said, was able to graduate with honors. It's like, okay, this is the space that I need to be in. College, I just had the wrong degree. Again, because I didn't get diagnosed until a year ago. So this was my thinking during grad school. It was like, oh, it was just the wrong field. Not realizing, no, your brain just could not process those courses. The environment was not cultivated for the way that I think, so the classes were too big. The teachers weren't inspiring. Because again, as I said, it could be a challenging thing, but if you make it interesting, you have our attention. So it was, it's been an interesting journey to kind of look at your life in reverse.
Yeah.
And go, oh, maybe this is why I did this. Maybe this is why I showed up this way. And it also had me looking at my, family of origin. I'm like, well, we've learned within this field that if you have a child that is neurodivergent, more than likely there's a high percentage that one of the parents is. And so I was like, Mama, Daddy. Then I looked at my mom's behaviors and I go, oh, I see how it's showing up in her. And again, I can't armchair diagnose her, but from my understanding, my learning of self, my continued education around ADHD, I can go, okay, yeah. If it was a parent, I can probably point to my mom and say that it's her. And again, it shows up with we say hyperactivity in boys, being physical. And I remember mom saying this all the time about herself and me. She's like, we just have busy brains. You just have a busy mind. Like, we're thinking all the time. And I'm thinking, again, this is normal because my mom is like this. I'm like this. What do you mean you have a quiet brain? Like, you're
like
not
you
thinking.
pause?
You pause? There's silence in there? I'm like, I can have 4 songs playing at the same time. And I don't know how, but it can happen. And I would realize, like, oh, hyperactivity can be here. Yeah. Not physically, but it could be mental hyperactivity, just constantly thinking. It's not necessarily thinking because you're stressed out. It's just literally, it's like having the radio on in the background. That's how our brains are. So watching my mom and seeing how she probably manages her ADHD by just kind of being a busybody in terms of like, well, keep things clean. We will stay in the kitchen because that's where I feel like I have a little more control. I will cook for others. Like she just got to do something.
Hi, I'm Felicia Davis Blakely, guest hosting for Darius Hillman. Joining me on the next edition in the arena, Cook County Commissioner Josina Morita.
I represent a district with 100 languages spoken. Until we can have full inclusion, we can't have full equity.
Join the conversation Tuesday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable 19 and streaming on cantv.org and the CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
Because we'd be like, why don't you just sit down? Like, you don't need to do all this, And she'd be like, no, we're going to cook. We have friends coming over. And I'm like, okay. And my dad would be just sitting there on his phone, scrolling, texting people. He knows how to relax. But and my siblings would always talk like, Mommy doesn't know how to relax. And now with this understanding of this diagnosis, I said, oh, I think it's because of her ADHD. Yeah. And I feel like the time that she can rest is actually if she's away. Like if she's traveling, I think there's this moment of like, oh, okay. I am
outside of her normal environment.
Yes.
Interesting. Oh, that's so good. Have you approached your mom with sharing your observations of her?
I had to, because as I shared, we got my son diagnosed the same year that I did. And I wanted to make sure that we had a safe place within our family and extended family to have conversations about neurodivergence. We haven't gotten our youngest, who's 4.5, evaluated yet for autism, but I'm like 99.99999% sure he's autistic. And our oldest is also on the spectrum. So he's ADHD and autism. And so when you have a generation where this language, these diagnoses, these titles was not the norm, there's this, he's okay. I mean, he's just a little different. Okay, what's a little different?
Different mean, right?
What does that mean exactly? If you know that he's not typical, or she's not engaging in the same way, let's ask the question, that there's nothing wrong with the child, but we see that there's a difference with the child. And so talking to my mom, highlighting for her how it shows up for me. And my mom is also, a woman of faith. And so we had to have that conversation too, because one day I think I had told her this summer, I said, man, all these different transitions with the kids' schedules this summer, taking them to camp, picking them up from camp, taking them to speech therapy, taking them to and from, it's interrupting my work day, because many of us with neurodivergence struggle with transitions. Like, we need transitions for our transitions. If we know that we have an appointment at 10 o'clock, that is the only thing that's on our mind, is to not be late. Or, let me not start something that will derail me and have me forget, because sometimes that's an issue, is that we'll forget, where it's almost the out of sight, out of mind, and we can go into hyper focus, and all of a sudden it's 9:50. I have a 10 o'clock appointment, so there are times where I felt like I couldn't even do anything. I couldn't start a project. I couldn't check anything off the list because I got to pick up, Anaya at 10 o'clock from camp. Then, I got to drop off such and such by 1 o'clock. I was like, oh no, I'm a business owner. I can't do any work during this summer if it's going to be like this. I need to figure out how to make my brain work for me in this environment. And I told my mom that, and she was just like, and I can't remember her exact words, but it was almost like, we gonna pray for deliverance. And I was like,
amen, mama.
I don't know if I need to be delivered from ADHD. I said, though it may be a new diagnosis, it has been my life.
Been around.
Right. So I'm like, just because we found a label now does not discount my whole experience.
Correct.
And so I had a highlight for her. I said, I'm still Farah. Like, nothing's changed with this diagnosis besides more awareness. But it's not something like, I just got a diagnosis of cancer, which was not existing before. We now need to figure out a way to treat it and hope that it doesn't become terminal. And yes, I believe in prayer, and you can pray for healing and all that stuff. But I was like, Mommy, this isn't anything that I'm asking God to take away from me, because this is just who I am. And so as I was talking to her, I said, and I believe that you have some symptoms of it. And she's like, okay. And so, and my family is Haitian, for your viewers. So there's also, the West Indian component to it. And it was so funny in that conversation. I think I had said something else, which led her to a story, which led her to another story, which led her to another story. And I was like, so Ma.
About.
And then she starts laughing at herself, because I was like, do you realize what you just did? And she was like, oh. And I just left her like that, because I wanted to normalize, like, Mommy, the way that your brain works, the way that you communicate with us, it may just be your ADHD, and you never had a title for it. There wasn't this kind of talk about mental health, growing up in Haiti and within your generation. But it's so funny. I was like, Mommy, I'll sit there and be like, oh yeah, I was on CAN TV. And then she was like, oh, which then made her think about cans. And then which made her think about, back in Haiti, we had this. And then we literally have like these breadcrumbs that lead us to the end of the conversation and be like, how did I get here? And it's like, oh, that was the sparking, word or question. And so just highlighting these things for her, I think, is making her recognize and become more aware of who she is too. Because I really believe, I understand people have issues with labels, and we have not done a good job in our human society on just being kind and recognizing just because somebody has a label doesn't mean that you have to other them. Like, yes, you can treat them differently, but not differently in the sense of being unkind. It's like, differently to meet their need.
Right.
And
that's good. Differently to, I just want to repeat that, differently to meet their need, because it's so important and critical, because all of us are different, each and every person. But that goes back to how do we be kind? Like being taught How can I be kind to someone who is different and has different needs than me?
What's going on, Chicago? I'm Darius Caffey, and I invite you to join me for a new episode of The Table on Air with special guest, the State of Illinois 7th District Senator, Mike Simmons.
We've seen people that get to a point and then sell us up the river. And I can't leave that with the next generation.
Join the conversation with us on Tuesday, September 26th at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV Cable, Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org, and available on the CAN TV Plus app.
I'm curious about what led you to be evaluated in your adulthood. Like, I'm gonna go and get evaluated. Like, what was that moment for you?
It was a combination of two things. One, we chose to homeschool our oldest two for the 2021-2022 school year because we just weren't settled with how the school was handling COVID. And so we're like, you know what? We have the means, we can do this. And having my children home, I was watching our oldest son, and I was watching how he was, working through the material. And I said, And it's interesting because I've always told Noah, your brain just works differently. Little did I know. Because there's some things that I think, man, this seems really basic. Like, you understand this concept. I don't understand how you don't understand this concept. And I would have to tell him, I'm not frustrated with you. I'm frustrated in trying to figure out how to communicate best with you so that your brain can understand. And I had to restate this several times because there were times I would have to walk away because I'm thinking, how come 2 + 2 ain't being 4 for you? But there must be some way that I'm communicating this that doesn't make sense to you. But we need to figure that out because I know you're smart because you understand this. And I was also watching moments that now I have language for of inattentiveness where, like, okay, well, let's sit down and work this through. Okay. And I'm explaining stuff and he's looking at Mars, Jupiter, and Neptune. And I'm like, yo, over here, what's going on? And so then there are moments where I say, are you listening and understanding better if you don't look at me? Because I do understand in terms of like the way our brains work, each of us are different, that sometimes, like right now I'm talking to you and I'm looking down, we're trying to find those words somewhere in our mind. And so I said, maybe it's more comfortable for you to actually look away as I explain things. But then there are things where I'm like, nah, dude, you need to look. You need to see this. And so I said, okay, I wonder if he has some ADHD. I'm curious. During that time, that year, I was also writing my book. And writing a book is challenging.
Yes.
I know, because you were a 5-time author.
6 now.
Ooh, okay. One day I'll get to your level. And even though I knew writing a book was hard, I was like, I don't think it's supposed to be this hard.
Right.
Like, this is really hard. And I had a dear friend of mine, Sarah Noel Wilson, shout out, who also received a late diagnosis of ADHD, I think a couple years ago. And she goes, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I would be surprised if you weren't neurodivergent. And I said, what makes you say that? And so she would share with me her journey to getting diagnosed. And though there weren't things that were exactly similar, there was stuff where I said, oh, that sounds like me. This is interesting. And she goes, if you can, I'd go get evaluated. So it was one to help me figure out why I was having such difficulty doing this task. And at the same time, I didn't want my son to feel alone in getting evaluated. And so it was like, mommy's going to do this with you too. And let's just say I ended up getting evaluated first because of my ADHD. I don't like filling out paperwork. So literally we could have gotten stuff done at the same time. he ended up getting evaluated like a whole 3 months later because something, do you remember how I told you about the whole?
Right.
So to fill out a paperwork online, there's many steps.
Correct.
We don't like too many steps. So if I'm filling out the paperwork and then it's like, we need your insurance number. Oh, my insurance card is downstairs. I'm upstairs. I don't want to walk downstairs right now because that will break my focus. So we'll just do this later. And do this later will end up being a week later. And then you get back to it and you get stuck at the same spot where you're like, oh, the insurance number, that's still downstairs. You know what? Let's just do this other task that I can do right here, right now. And so it just kept delaying over and over again. And I was like, if this ain't no sign of ADHD, I don't know what it is.
Farah, you are freeing people. No, seriously. In our closing question, what advice would you give someone who may have a wondering or a curiosity, like, I think I should go get evaluated? Like, what is that one thing you would say to that person?
Go get evaluated. Because we live in a world of social media where everybody is self-diagnosing, right? You know, they'll see something and be like, oh, I do that too. I have ADHD, or I do that too. I have anxiety. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't WebMD yourself, okay? They are people who have spent the money and the time to learn, to research, to understand these different ways that we show up. And so I would recommend that if you're curious, definitely find some credible content creators who also have the knowledge and the expertise. You know, find a content creator that does specialize in ADHD. Learn, you know, see what's in the community, but don't stop there. Like if there's a lot of things that are you feel like you're checking yes to, if you can, you know, if you have your insurance provider, see who can evaluate you. And I would recommend getting someone who does a proper evaluation, not just a one sheet that goes, oh yeah, it looks like you have ADHD, here's some pills. Find someone who's going to take the time to do multiple evaluations and assessments so that you have a full understanding of how it shows up. Because every person, again, like I said, ADHD has so many things that are different. Some are more hyperactive, some are more inattentive. And then, you know, do your work after that.
Thank you, Farah, for educating us on your journey.
Thank you for having
and
me.
And it is my hope that people get the help that they need.
Same.
Yes. So thank you all. Remember, get the help that you need from credible sources.
Yes.
Take care.